Hey everyone, welcome back to Why Care podcast. I'm Reshma Saujani, and I am here with Tim Allen. And Tim, I say this every week. I am so good. I'm good now that I'm seeing you.
Me too.
I love
it's
doing
been too
this
long.
podcast with you. I know. Who loves who more? I don't know. It's like a big contest here.
I love it.
Well, we have another amazing guest with us. And before we get to her, how's it going? How's your week been?
It's good. The boys, 2 7-year-olds, for those who are first-time listeners, the 2 7-year-old kids have migrated from peewee soccer to big boy soccer. And so what I mean by that is they are kind of now in the phase of where they're learning not to use their hands in the game of soccer. And so I'm like, all right. It was great. It's like mass chaos on a Saturday. I wouldn't have had it any other way. We were running around. But I also learned I'm that parent. Does that make sense? Like I'm the parent who's like, go for the ball, get the ball. Like they're 7. They're not in, the major league soccer tournament, but I have become that parent.
Oh my gosh. Hit it harder.
Yeah,
Gosh.
exactly. I'm like, it's over there. It's over there. And I'm like, oh my Lord, like seriously, this is not going to make or break the children. Like I got to get some rational thought put into this. So it was good. How about yourself? How are things going with you? It's been a little while.
Good. The kid, my 8-year-old actually started school last week. So New York City Public Schools open on Thursday. So I was like, here, you please have him because I had enough over the summer. Everyone's like, how was your summer? I'm like, shitty. All I basically did was like drive my kids around. So I was excited that school started. My 2-year-old Sai is still not sleeping, but like check this. So basically around 1 o'clock in the morning, like my son turns literally into like Chucky. Do you remember that movie Chucky with that doll? Like, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm like, and by day, he's like the sweetest thing ever. But anyway, he's a horrible eater, a horrible sleeper, a horrible napper. And so he gets up at like 12, 2, 5, and 7. And so I've been sleeping this way basically for like almost a year. And I am just at my end, right?
Yeah.
So I finally caved and I got a sleep doctor. And so we're starting today. But check this, Tim. So basically, when he wakes up at 1, you call her. And so you put your AirPods on, you call her, and she basically coaches you through what to say. She says it takes 4 days, money back guarantee, never actually had to give anybody their money back before. So I don't know, like my life might be like radically changing in a week. So we'll see.
I am fascinated by this. Like I'm fascinated that she's on call at 1 a.m. So clearly she's disrupting her own sleep pattern. Like, sorry, I got to unpack this for a second. We got to take a minute on this for the podcast. When he's Chucky, is he like standing at the end of the bed and then you wake up in like a cold sweat and he's just staring at you? Or is it like he's like active and trying to wake you up when he has night terrors? Or do you hear him like what's the deal?
So what she described to me too is like, so basically he can't get into REM sleep. So every time he starts REM, he gets terrified and he wakes up screaming. He's like unconsolable. And then you kind of eventually give him a bottle and he kind of calms down. But basically, and this is like, I have run into so many parents who are experiencing this right now that like, I don't know if it's a COVID thing or like what it is, but he just hasn't learned how to soothe himself. And so this is why you're seeing so many more kids back in the bed with their parents, right? Or not being able to sleep. And so essentially, I don't know, I think she may have some magic words or something, right? That she's going to tell me that is going to help him soothe himself.
That is incredible. And then I can't function at 8 a.m., yet alone 1 a.m. So like, are you going to like have the phone pre-dialed for,
I guess so. Well, I'm jarring up. So
so you're awake. You're awake. Like you're like,
I'm kind of awake and I think I've learned how to like go back to sleep quickly. But here's the thing. I mean, it's going to be for the next 4 days, a process of trying. Because he's going to scream and he's going to want that bottle. And he's going to want to be in my bed and I'm going to be bringing him back and my husband and I are going to be doing this. So it's going to be interesting. Because, the old method used to be that you walk them back and then you stay in the room and then you slide out over the course of like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And it's horrible.
It's horrible.
This is like some 4-day thing. That's like got to be magical maybe.
I'm so jealous. I wish I'd known of this stuff. Like, you got to tell me the results because I'm so jealous.
Don't be jealous yet until it actually works.
You're like, wait for the results. Let's see what happens. Hey, you got a money back guarantee. There's nothing you're going to really like lose out on, right? I used to take Ryder, one of the twins, back to his bed. And if you can imagine me, I know people can't see me visually, but I'm a 6'6" man. Then I'm crawled up into a, toddler's bed. And then I would wake up and I'm like, why does my neck hurt? I wonder, right? Because I'm sleeping in this like condensed, compressed bunk bed situation. And then like it never actually fixed anything. So it's like crazy.
No.
So, but by the way, good for you. I really want this to work. Do you and your husband trade off on this? Like, is it you something where are you like consistently the one who's
So this
who's
is
waking
the
up
problem. Well, he does nights and I do mornings. So he's kind of a zombie after 2:00. But she is actually insists on both parents doing it. So we conference call her. So I don't know how it's gonna be really, really, really interesting.
I love this. But you're going to be conference calling at 1 a.m.
And so, but today we have like a meeting where she basically is like, here's the 10 things, like you gotta go get like blackout lights and I don't know. And like we live in New York City. It's not like there's like, 20 rooms that we can all like work on. So,
totally right.
But listen, but the lack of sleep, Tim, is killing me.
Yeah.
And it's just, you realize how important sleep is, like fundamentally to everything. And I've kind of been both me and my husband kind of been functioning on this weird sleep pattern of sleeping every 3 hours and waking up. But it's really starting to kind of get to my mental health. Like I'm just, I don't, and there's no point of doing anything. Like I go to bed at 8:30 to have a shot of having 7 hours of sleep. So there's no, like I'm getting not a break,
Yeah. And if it's incongruent sleep too, it's not always, it's like you're getting woken up in the middle of it and then you got to go back to, it's like, that's not healthy for you. That's not healthy for anyone, right? It's a little bit of the thing I have an issue with on the hustle culture situation. Like you could power through it, like anyone could do it. And I'm like, that is such a joke for parents. Like, we have humans that we are trying to make functioning, operating good adults. And we are the most sleep deprived segment at this point in terms of trying to get things to work. And it's like, oh, you could power through it as a parent. I'm like, no, like that's crazy talk. Yeah. I don't want to do that. I want to find balance.
And there's really no empathy for it. Because listen, I feel gracious that I'm, my own CEO of my own nonprofit. My team understands, but I can't imagine going to a workplace where you're barely functioning, you're barely sleeping, and then you're supposed to perform and outperform. Yeah. And it's a huge challenge. And I do think, I want to hear what Claire has to say about this later, but I do think there's just real kind of things that have happened from a parenting perspective, i.e. the not sleeping or the kids back in the bed, that I think I'm hearing consistently from parents across the spectrum. And that COVID has really just upended a lot of patterns in the ways that families have been operated that have a huge toll, on work and on life. So,
no, you're absolutely right. Even in the mechanisms. Yeah. Even in the ways that people used to divide work and home. Right. I was never one of those people who was like, oh, there's a division, there's a split. But there really was the physical manifestation of going to an office and doing something and then being in your home. I find now that my home is my office, it's really hard to disconnect and actually get that peace. Does that make sense? It's just I know I leave I'm fortunate enough to have a room that can make an office. But even that, I'm like, ooh. I walk by it when I go to my bedroom and I'm like, there's work. There's not enough space.
Right.
In that
but
world,
also when I used to go into an office, even the walk to work, I'd listen to a podcast or I'd catch up with a friend or, you had some amount of separation. Now there's none of that. And I think in particular for women, I know Claire writes about this, it's I also do more stuff around the house.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm now also I'm working from home. So my husband's gone back in the office. And so it's not even work. So that's it's interesting to see now, again, how more things are kind of piling on my plate. I made him start taking the dog to his office because I was like, one thing's got to go. You know what I mean? You got to take one of them.
You must do this.
You must, right. I am not going to, and my dog, Stan, is 13 years old. She's going to go bathroom every hour. And I was like, this is not working, right? I'm none of this is working right now. So that's, some division of labor now.
It's so right on. Meaning the marginal pickup I think people do in terms of being at home right now, working from home, right? It's this will only take 5 minutes, or, it's 10 minutes, or, you feel the obligation of doing this. It adds up. Like, it really adds up. There's so many times where I'm like, I could go pack the kids' lunch real quick and go do this. And it's like I'm fitting things in, but I'm fitting in a lot more things, especially on that front. So it does compound over time. It really becomes
and
a thing.
it's one last thing before you cook. She's probably like, okay. But like now you also realize this, now that we're back at IRL and everybody wants to do in-person stuff, that I started planning my in-person schedule the way I was planning my Zoom schedule. And I turned to look at my calendar. I'm like, why am I flying next week to DC, Orlando, you know what I mean, Vegas and Chicago in 5 days? Like, how did I do that? And it's like, I have to reteach myself how I want to live because it's not on Zoom now. Like, I'm actually having to go in person and go have those conversations and do those talks and have those meetings.
Yep. And there's a lot of exhaustion that comes, like just the social exhaustion, that cognitive exhaustion that comes without doing it in person is vis-a-vis Zoom. I say it even happens on Zoom. Like, there's days I walk out of this office, it's dark out at 7:00, and I'm like, I've no joke, beginning to end was on Zoom calls back to back. And it's like, it's just, you do get into this fit in more thing with being remote, working from home, the Zoom culture. And man, five cities and no.
I know.
I'm with you.
It's not good. It's not happening anymore. That's it. I made one mistake and I'm not doing it again. So I want to welcome Claire Cain Miller. Literally, you are my hero. You are most women I know hero in terms of just speaking the truth. Your coverage at the New York Times on gender, on work, on family, recently on abortion has just meant everything, I think, to women. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've known you, we go way back, early Girls Who Code days as you were writing about diversity in Silicon Valley before it became a thing. You're just an incredible, incredible talent, truth teller, and just a wealth of knowledge. And I think so much of your reporting has led to so much policy change, both in Washington and in workplaces.
Very
so
kind.
We're thrilled to have you. So Claire, for years, we're excited to have you. I'm just so excited to talk to you. I'm like, hopefully you have 6 hours to be here with me, Tim, but probably not the case. But you've written on the connection between women, childcare, work, and the economy. And you did that before COVID. And then the pandemic hit. And I would say that, you continue to write about it and the complicated relationship between these things. Some of what we saw play out, we were talking about the division of labor, right, was expected, given the lack of true infrastructure we have. But some other things were really surprising. And there's been a lot of debate about, did women actually get pushed out of the workforce? Are we actually back? What happened? What didn't happen? And I don't even think that there's real alignment in many ways, which is wild to me. We'll talk about that. But I'd love for you to just tell us what did actually happen to mothers in the pandemic, and have we rebounded?
Sure. It's funny because when the pandemic started, this was obviously all right on my beat. It's all the stuff I'd been writing about for years, and all of a sudden it was in crisis. And I kept having friends text me like, "Oh, are you covering this? This is crazy." And I'm like, "No." I have 2 boys too. Sounds like both of you do. I'm like, my 2 kids are home. Like, what? Like, I'm not, this is like the most important time on my beat, and I can't do it. I'm trying to do this weird remote school thing before it was even like set up. Oh my gosh. Anyway, what happened was that at the very beginning, many, many women left. 5 million mothers left the workforce. In some cases, they were laid off because they, worked in restaurants or grocery stores, and those or grocery stores didn't close, but they were essential worker jobs that closed. In many, many other cases, they left because their kids were home, and someone had to watch their kids and someone had to do school. And it became very clear very fast that was going to be very hard. And so mothers did what they always do when there's a crisis with children, and they stepped up and they became the people who made the sacrifices to do that. What has happened in recent months, and even, going back a year, is that mothers have totally rebounded. In fact, more mothers are now at work, paid work, than a year before the pandemic. So mothers have more than rebounded. There's a few things to note here. One is that I say then a year before the pandemic, because right before the pandemic began, and I know it's really hard for any of us to remember this time, there was a period of very, very low unemployment. And there was a hiring crisis, sort of like the one we're in now, but for different reasons. And, single mothers were working, people with, disabilities were working in greater numbers than before. People who had been in jail were working at greater numbers before. All these people who had a harder time in the job market generally were getting jobs, and employers were offering higher wages, and there were more benefits like parental leave. There were all these things to recruit people. So many, many more mothers were working than usual. So the drop looked bigger than we might, have seen if there weren't such an anomalous time right before the pandemic. So the economist who I trust most on women in work is Claudia Golden, who is just fantastic and has been doing this her whole career. She's at Harvard, and her data on this, the data on this is the data. It just exists. And that's why it's sort of funny that there's a controversy. We know the number of mothers working. That's data that's collected by the federal government. We have that information. She makes the point that it's best to look at a year before the pandemic because it doesn't include this strange blip. And when you look at that, mothers are actually working in larger shares than they had been. That definitely doesn't take into account the stress that mothers are under. So I don't want to be like, oh, it was actually all fine for mothers in the pandemic and parents in the pandemic and women in the pandemic. It was nothing, no big deal. We're all back to normal, because we all know that we're not. And that women and mothers in particular, all parents, but mothers in particular underwent a lot of stress and still are. Like, not all the childcare infrastructure is back. When you guys were talking earlier about the home-related tasks that end up taking time out of your day, I was thinking about how, we had childcare till 6 p.m. every day before the pandemic to account for commutes and everything. And then all of a sudden we had nothing, of course. And then even last year we had no aftercare at school. They decided that the kids could be in school, but there couldn't be aftercare for some pandemic logic. And so we were like, oh my gosh, we have kids home at 3:15. How are we going to do this? So now this year there's these after school classes that go till 4:30. And I'm like, awesome. We have till 4:30. That's huge. But before I had childcare till 6. So it's like all these things are eating into your days in the way that the infrastructure is just really not back to the full extent that it was before. So parents are really still experiencing a ton of stress.
And talk a little bit about so childcare is a big issue. We talked about many daycare centers are still shut down. We didn't have relief, in Washington. We know that most families spend more on childcare than any other cost, you know what I mean? And also, how do you see that across wealth and socioeconomic status? What are the other disparities that we're seeing? Are some mothers functioning better than others, or are we all kind of in the same boat?
So throughout the pandemic, and Claudia Golden's data shows this very clearly once again, education mattered more than gender or parental status in terms of who lost work. People without college degrees were much more likely to lose their jobs, in large part because they were much more likely to work in the service sector, which is what shut down. When you look at the data on mothers, it's pretty interesting because in a couple senses, it totally reversed who felt that they needed to leave the workforce or who was sort of pushed out of the workforce. At the very start of the pandemic, it was mothers of school-age children because childcare mostly stayed open at the beginning. I had one kid in school and one kid in childcare at the time. The childcare closed for 2 months and then it was allowed to reopen, and school stayed closed for a year and a half. So it was mostly parents of school-age children at first who left because their kids were home. It was also mostly essential workers because if your kids are home and you work in a restaurant or cleaning a hospital or doing these things that you can't do at home, obviously you had to stay home. Later in the pandemic, both of those things completely switched. So schools started to open. School-age children started to go back, but childcares they were still open, but they encountered this huge hiring crisis that still goes on today, where they're just really, really short-staffed and there's these long waiting lists. And also, children under 5 weren't vaccinated until very, very recently. So some parents didn't feel comfortable sending their children to childcare. Or even if they did, childcare was closed for 2 weeks at a time constantly. Like there were constant COVID exposures and everyone had to stay home for 2 weeks. Or in a lot of childcares with these unvaccinated kids, if you had any cold symptoms, you had to stay home for 2 weeks. And as you both know, because you've both had toddlers, they have colds like for 5 years straight. And so they were constantly home. And so it was parents of childcare age kids under 5 who ended up being home. And then it was also the white collar workers who were working remotely who started to leave. They had not left at first because they could work from home. The theory on this from the researchers I've talked to is that there was just like complete burnout. It was like, I've been doing this for a year, this thing with like working in my closet on Zoom with like the laundry in and my children running around, and I'm done. I can't do it anymore. It's impossible. And so, they didn't leave in huge numbers. All in all, white collar workers who can work remotely, who have college degrees, have mostly been able to keep their jobs. But as essential workers went back to work, it's the white collar workers who were working at home with their kids there who started to leave.
Mm-hmm. Last question before I turn to me. So, okay. The data about moms, right? It's part of why I think there was, quote, the controversy is not about whether it was true or not, but what does it mean? And what does it tell us, right? Because we know that moms are still exhausted and burnt out and are making different choices, or if they're back at work, at a huge cost to themselves. And so how do we use this experience that we just went through to actually change and make structural change?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is it means something kind of positive. The fact that mothers, for the most part, held on to their jobs means that, first of all, in many, many families, they're the primary breadwinner right now. They have been for years. Either they're a single parent or they earn more than their husbands or partners, or they earn the same, and their income is essential. They're no longer working as like a supplementary income. It also means that they have really hard-earned careers. They went to school. They care about these jobs. They have a sense of purpose from them. It is something that was part of their identity. They didn't want to let go of. They wanted to go back. That sort of attachment to the labor market, as economists would say, that sort of like, tie to your career and your job is relatively new for women in America. That's something that we've seen in only the last 50 years. So that is pretty remarkable sign, I think, and sort of a positive message to take from all this. The less positive message to take from all this is that this showed very quickly how fragile our entire care infrastructure was. Families had really patched it together, whether, it was a nanny and childcare, or whether it was relying on neighbors or grandparents, whether it was, that someone works the night shift and someone works the day shift, and they have to like be there in this exact 5 minutes to switch, or one person, is home for the kids and the other person is leaving. These ways that everyone had figured it out completely individually, because there was no societal or structural answer for this. Every family had to work it out on their own, and it was very fragile. And very quickly in March 2020, it was just gone. I remember taking a walk in that period and thinking, I'm really, really lucky to live in the city that both my husband and my parents live in. And we relied on the grandparents a lot. And all of a sudden we could not see the grandparents. Not only that, but we are lucky they've been in good health so far. So we hadn't had the elder care situations yet, but we were like delivering them groceries. Remember at the very beginning when it was like, elderly people can't leave their houses. We don't know what's happening. And it was like, wow, that shifted really fast. Like I have nothing. I have nobody I can rely on. I can't bring in babysitters. Childcare and school is closed. I can't call the grandparents. I can't call the neighbors. Like we can't enter anyone's house. And I think it just really quickly exposed how fragile it all is. And what I think we're seeing now with the fact that so many parents, especially of kids under 5, are really still struggling with childcare is that none of that was fixed. There were a lot of ideas the Democrats put forward in the Build Back Better bill for subsidized childcare, and that did not happen. The bill that was ultimately passed didn't include any of the family policies at all. And nothing has really changed. In fact, it's gotten worse because there's the childcare hiring crisis, there's unavailability. But I think that what this showed, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, has said this very clearly. The pandemic showed that childcare was a broken market, something that it was before, but this showed it very clearly. And it still is. Nothing changed.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, I can relate so much to the support structures you're talking about, Claire, like falling apart, right? We, I also relate, by the way, to the after school, meaning like we are still struggling with the after school program where it's like, which, I wake up every day and I'm like, which job ends at 3 p.m.? Because I kind of need that one right now because my kids come home and they think that it's just like dad time. And I'm like, wait, no, I'm still working. And then we have to like figure it all. It's just relatable. You're right. I mean, it did shine the big spotlight on the infrastructure that was just not there, right? The antiquated old systems we're still relying upon from a farming system back, in the 30s and 40s. It's just really interesting. I want to ask you a question on you had a piece you did early on in the pandemic. I think it was early 2020 that I found fascinating in terms of how fathers and mothers are taking on the roles differently at home. Meaning, one of the pieces that hit me and struck me when I read it back early on in the pandemic, I've been reading studying for a while, was, just how, I don't know, ego's probably the wrong word, but how fathers, myself probably included, think we're doing a lot more than we actually are when it comes to like virtual tutoring and the other things in terms of teaching the children. I mean, like, I know if you'd asked me, I'd be like, yeah, all the time. And I was like, really made me step back and think, whoa, that's I'm probably, guilty of this as well. Would love to hear your thoughts kind of on how that's playing out, what the data is showing in regards to, has that changed? Has that shifted? Have new norms started to emerge?
Yeah. So that was a very fun's maybe the wrong word, survey that we did asking who was in charge of the remote schooling at your house. Yeah. And I will say that we did not ask if you had a partner who was of the same gender or not. Most of the people who answered was a man and a woman, a father and a mother parenting. So 80% of the mothers said they were in charge of remote schooling, and over half of the fathers did. I think it was something like 56%. So that's impossible because there's no way that because we asked who did the most in charge, not like, did you do it? So 3% of the mothers said that the fathers were in charge of remote schooling. So 55% versus 3% of women agree. Wow. And it's amusing. It shows a couple things. It shows that this generation of fathers on the whole does significantly more than your fathers did on the whole. Of course, these are generalizations, but the time that fathers spend doing child-related activities has increased. It's a fact. And men who are parents of young children now, for the most part, say they want an egalitarian relationship. They say they want to be involved with the children. They say they want to do these things. So there's both a desire to, and in truth, they are doing more. But what the data shows is that women still do an hour more childcare and an hour more housework than men. And that was true when it came to remote schooling as well. It's true in all parts of life. But then I looked into it a little bit more to find out like why this was happening. Like, why did women just automatically step up? Because for the most part, the vast majority of women, mothers in this country work for pay. So it's not that these were like a bunch of stay-at-home moms who were doing this. And what I found in research all over the world, not just in the United States, in other countries, fathers play a bigger role in their families, but even in like Scandinavian countries where there's like this very generous paternity leave and fathers take it and it's different. When there's a crisis, like a child has a disability or a cancer diagnosis or is hospitalized, the mother becomes the default. She's the one who sacrifices time and work and does that. It's sort of like automatically. And I think of what happened at first with COVID as sort of like a crisis. It was like all of a sudden the kids are home, they have to go to school. What are we going to do? And the mothers just stepped up. There's also another reason that this happens in the United States, which is that there is this expectation that men who become fathers work more. Like they've done these great resume studies, where they make fake resumes and then apply to jobs. And then they've also looked at who gets pay bumps or pay decreases. When men become fathers, or if they say they're a father on a resume, they say like they're in the PTA or they coach a kid's soccer team or some way that they imply that, they actually benefit from that and they get paid more. And it's because of this expectation that once you become a father, now you're in charge of supporting your family and you're going to be much more responsible and diligent at work. And it's very important to you that you work hard so that you can earn enough to support your family. And for mothers, it's the opposite. So in these resume studies, if they say that if you're on the PTA, you're less likely to get called back for an interview, you're less likely to get a raise. And it's because they assume that you're going to have these like dual priorities, and that if a kid gets sick, you're out, and you're out for the day, you have to go pick them up. Like you're going to be the default. You're always going to be leaving right at 5. And these assumptions are of course not true across the board, but they're baked into American work culture in a lot of really interesting
ways. And the pandemic played that out, right? It's like we did become the default caretakers. We were the ones that said, I had to get off the Zoom earlier. I can't do that thing because I need to homeschool my kids. And so that in many ways did play out that way. Do you feel like in a non-crisis setting, we can change it? Like, I always talk about this ad in the Philippines where they did this whole campaign about laundry being love. And it was to basically shift the gender ratio, right, of men doing more laundry. I always joke that like my dream is to have LeBron James and Snoop Dogg doing the laundry at the next Super Bowl ad to really, basically give America a challenge of like how we're going to shift the quotient of care work that men are doing. Like, is that possible, do you think? And like, would it change equality? Would it change things for women? Would it give us back more time?
It certainly would change things for women if men did more. Absolutely. And men do more this generation. So I think, it is possible. I don't know if it will ever be true in the current system that things are completely egalitarian. And one reason I say that is because I've looked at a bunch of studies for a story because I was trying to find a way to answer the same question, looking at same-sex couples who become parents. And when same-sex couples become parents, one prioritizes earning and the other prioritizes home stuff and caregiving. Not meaning that one drops out of the labor force, but one has like a more flexible schedule or is more likely to leave early if there's a care emergency. And the reason the researchers who study this say is because our workplaces are so all demanding that it really makes sense that one person is like, I'm going to double down over here. I'm going to make sure we have this steady income. In fact, we are exponentially rewarded in American workplaces for overwork. Like if you're willing to work like 12 hours a day or be available on a Sunday, you don't make that much more money. You make like exponentially more money. And so it just makes like logical sense for one person to prioritize that and the other person to prioritize the kid. So I don't know that in the current system, it will ever be fully egalitarian. I mean, two people can get flexible jobs and really make that work in their own family system. But there are some ways that I think can change things. I think one is that family policies, especially paid parental leave, meaning that the father has time alone at the beginning, alone with the baby. It's shown, it's great for baby bonding. It's great for like indicating at work, like I have this other priority that's also important. There's also been studies that show like if you change diapers more if you had paid paternity leave, you're changing more diapers at age 1, you're more involved with like school and feeding things at age 2. So it does set people on a track for that. I think that subsidized childcare would help because in countries that have that, women are much more likely to be able to work more for obvious reasons, all the things that we've been talking about. I think that within corporations, modeling can be really important. So, there's a lot of companies that have, say, paid parental leave that the company offers, paid paternity leave. And there's an unspoken or sometimes spoken expectation that men would never take that. Or maybe you take that for 2 days while your baby's literally being born. Or maybe you take that for like a week and then you're back. And when CEOs talk about that, or when CEOs even say, this meeting has a hard stop at 4 because I'm taking my kid to the pediatrician, or, whatever it is, when you say why, it really makes a difference. This has been shown in a few small studies. It's also just been shown in a huge amount of reporting that I've done talking to men about like at my company, the New York Times, there's very generous parental leave, including paternity leave. And when I first got pregnant, I've had 2 babies working there. When I first got pregnant, I went around saying like, so they offer 6 months? Like, no one takes that, right? And everyone was like, everyone takes that. You take that.
Like you're judged if you don't
even
take
like
it almost. Right.
Yeah. Like the senior editors were like, you take that. And since then they've expanded paternity leave, and it's the same thing. It's not just like, okay, but it's an expectation. Yeah. And I've heard that it's like that at Google. I've heard it's like that at some other companies. So I think that can be really important to set that cultural expectation up high. And then like at a much smaller level, I mean, this is like an ongoing frustration, but like the soccer teams and the play dates and the school emails, they just reach out to the mother. It's just like, the birthday party invitations go to the mother. And it's like, it almost will take as much time for me to like put it on my husband's calendar and forward it to him and be like, buy the birthday, as it just do the birthday present and take the kid and RSVP myself. And so I think there's just like at a very, those are like cultural changes that we all can make. But I will share one funny story is that when we found out school would be all remote, the year after the pandemic, with the school year after the pandemic started, I started freaking out because I remembered the spring before. And there were all these like pods and like groups forming of like how we can do school for like working parents. And it felt very sort of like cliquish, like who, asking your friends. And I'm like, I don't even like, no, I'm not in a pod. What am I going to do? And so I decided I would just email my son's whole class, like all the parents in the class, and say like, is anyone looking for this? We need some support here. Is anyone looking to form a group to do remote school together? And I specifically emailed both parents of all 28 people in the class. And I got, like a dozen or more replies only from the mothers. I did not hear from a single father. So, I don't know. I don't know how it completely changes. I think there are things we can do, but there's like a deep cultural thing going on.
I couldn't.
It's so true. I mean, like, I'm so guilty of it. Like, I know that my partner gets the logistical emails on all the birthday parties and everything else. And he's like, I'd much rather just deal with this than have to work through you to then deal with it. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But I know that like, I feel bad because I get the emails and then I'm like, you got this, right? Like, I'm like, dude, like,
so wait, is Claire right? Because
you're,
in your marriage, is that true?
It's true. It's very true. So it's so fascinating to hear you talk, Claire, because it's like, there is this, like, we had to be intentional about who was going to go work and do the whole thing and who was going to take care of the kids. And, very promising career, worked on an ABC show, got an Emmy, like has done really well stuff. But it's also like your schedule is you have to go travel to a shoot location for 4 or 5 weeks. My schedule is like, I gotta be in the office and do something. And so like, we had to like really be intentional about it, but we also fell into patterns, if that makes sense. Like some of it was intentional. And then some of it is like, it's just this like societal drive towards like the inevitable, if that makes any sense. And I'm with you. I think over time, hopefully structure will change. I'm a big proponent of normalizing paternity leave. Like I wrote a whole article about how bad I was at that. And don't do what I did is basically what it says in the whole thing. And, I do think that could help shift over time, but it really is interesting to watch like these patterns start to form because, like to your point, like I get emails sometimes on a birthday party and I'm like, you got this? And I forward it and I'm like.
But it does make sense in some, right? Like a division of labor makes sense.
Yeah.
There's no point in 2 parents spending that much mental energy RSVPing to a birthday party and buying the present. Like, right. And if one person does the laundry and the other person does, awesome. Like if, one person, in my house, it makes sense for the person who likes to cook more, which is me. I hate gardening. I want nothing to do with it. He gardens. Like I cook. So it also makes sense that I grocery shop because it doesn't make sense for him to grocery shop for the food that I'm going to cook. I want to be like, know what I'm going to cook. So division of labor makes perfect sense. But being intentional about it, I think matters a lot. And so this was interesting from these studies that I mentioned earlier of the same-sex parents once a child arrived, is that because there wasn't like a societal expectation or a default, a conversation was forced to be had.
Oh yeah.
So one person did prioritize a career and one person did prioritize like being the on-call parent, but it was like the result of a conversation. Like, whether it's I make more money or I have a more flexible schedule or I'm ready to take a break or whatever it is. or like, I like to fold laundry. I find it relaxing, these kind of like and I hate to do this. So can you do this? But just having a conversation as opposed to falling into it.
Yeah.
And I think that, that is something that opposite sex couples could maybe benefit from, because then it feels at least like it was something planned and a choice and not just
and
like
it's not gendered.
Right.
I feel this way as the logistical parent and the mom. Like, I sometimes rather work with the dad, right? Because the mom that I'm working with is just, like not that great about like accepting calendar invites, right? And so I think your point, Claire, about, and I'd love to know if there are other countries that you have found that actually don't have the same cultural norms as we have and are closer to being egalitarian because they're having these conversations, or it's not just as gendered as it feels here. Because, it's the same reason why in America we have a nursing shortage and a teacher shortage. It's because we don't teach our boys to do care work. All of us have sons. And I know for my family, that's very intentional to making my son, who is a natural caregiver, feel comfortable that that's what he could do if that's what he wants to do. And so it is so deeply baked into American DNA that boys, men don't do that work, even when they want to. And I wonder too, my second part of this is like, what do you feel like is the biggest lever? If you could wave your magic wand, is it culture? Is it corporate policy? Or is it government policy that would make the quickest amount of change when it comes to this?
That's interesting. So my favorite piece that I've done in my entire career is called How to Raise a Feminist Son. And it was exactly what you're talking about, of just like we, starting from in utero, when we start like, oh, what are you having? And it's like, I get it. It's the only information you have about this creature you haven't met, but you end up assigning so much meaning to that. Like, is it a boy or a girl? And, like parents of baby girls who are bald put like bows on their head just to signify like it's a girl, not a boy. Like, we do so much gendering early on. And I think that, a big part of that is like you said, teaching that girls are very caring and that girls do care work and that boys like gravitate in other directions. And, there are gender differences. I used to, before I had kids, think that you could like totally avoid that. And it is not true. There are gender differences, but a lot of them are really heavily driven by society and culture. And I think that addressing that with boys early on would make a big difference. To answer your other question, I think that in other countries, we've seen that public policy drives culture and that can be a really important element. Corporate policy is very helpful to the people who work at those companies, but all in all, it's inequitable because the people who have the best benefits, family benefits like subsidized childcare and long paid parental leaves, are people earning a lot of money working at like salaried white collar jobs. And there's been a recent movement among companies like Walmart and Starbucks to extend parental leave to hourly workers, but it's much less common. And it also, like health insurance, means that it's tied to you having that job, which, you don't know when your care needs are going to arise over the course of your life or career. So public policy is more effective because it's generally universal. And in other countries, it does end up affecting culture. For example, what I mentioned earlier is in Scandinavia, it's very common to see men out, with strollers and out during the daytime taking care of kids because they have these like extremely long parental leaves and they take them. And so, I think that has sort of like a filter down effect, but I don't want to idealize, Scandinavia or Europe that has these better policies, because we also find that women's careers are really stunted there compared to the United States. So many more women work. A much larger share of mothers work in European countries that have these generous family policies. And, economics research has showed that that's directly tied because there's these long leaves and there's these subsidized childcare, and public school essentially starts at 3 with like free preschool that everybody goes to. More women work, more mothers work, but they do not reach as high levels. It's much less likely for a woman to be in a senior position in European companies. And one of the reasons is, it's hard to know, but probably employers know that these long parental leaves might be taken And so they might not, promote people at the same level. Also, there's like a right to part-time work in many European countries. So women take it. They take part-time work so that they can spend more time with their children, which then like slows their career. So you can debate whether, that's a pro or a con. I think many people in the United States would advocate for a right to part-time work here. It would really alleviate much of the caregiving burden at certain phases of life when it's, larger and you don't want to quit your job, but you'd love to like maintain a income and a connection to your job, but work fewer hours for a time and then expand again. Like that sounds amazing. And it really doesn't exist in a lot of jobs here, but it does end up having longer term effects on people's careers.
That's great. It's Claire, I feel like I could talk to you all day. It's just like fascinating the amount of information.
I could talk about it.
I mean, like, it's just even hearing about it. It's like we talk about the United States, we talk about the Ford, we talk about Build Back Better, we talk about the plans that have been proposed, and that didn't really get they got traction within DC, they got traction within the Democrats, but they didn't really get they didn't make it to the light of day. And so I know when I talk to parents out there, there is this just level of exhaustion, right? So waiting on policy or corporate, governmental policy, corporate policy. Any advice you have for parents at this moment in time on just the exhaustion in which they're feeling, the stress of working from home, the gender roles in which we play? Like, I know that a lot of mothers are sitting out there, even fathers sitting out there are going, okay, what do I do? You're right. The system's against us. The government's not stepping up. I have to work at the right company in order to get this going. What's the hope? What's the prospects here we can move into?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. So I would say like you are not alone and take it easy on yourself, but the you're not alone, I think speaks to something else. We have always left family life. We've not always left. In recent decades, we have left family life up to individual families to figure out. And that was a very conscientious choice made by the federal government at a point in time that has now just become the expectation. So once you have a baby, you're sort of on your own. You figure out, starting with postpartum care for the mother, there isn't any. You figure out childcare, and you figure out, are you going to do a nanny, or are you going to get on a wait list? And then you go on Google and you research this and you figure it out. And then, in school, you figure out what you're going to do at 3 p.m. It's just all up to individual people. And like I said earlier, I think the pandemic really highlighted how much we each had these completely different sort of patched together systems for ourselves. And I think what it's going to take is a more societal approach, because raising children has never actually been an individual endeavor. It's always been a community endeavor. And we all knew that because we all had these communities. We had to create them ourselves, but we had them. We had these communities and they disappeared in March 2020, and we all felt that. And now we've worked hard to rebuild them. And so I guess what I would say is, I don't want to put any of the onus on parents who are already overloaded. Right. But what I would say is, remember that we're in this together. And as much as we can, build those communities, trade a day with your neighbor where you pick up the kids and they pick up the kids and you watch them after school if aftercare is your problem right now. Or if someone's sick, get on your app and send them delivery dinner. If they have 3 sick kids at home and can't cook that night, that's all we have is this community, and it's not anyone's fault. It is hard. I think that is my biggest message to parents, is it is feeling really hard, and it's not your fault. This is a systemic structural problem that we are all feeling individually right now. And, apart from public policy, apart from, changing the way that work works, doing all these things, all we can do is sort of help each other build communities to lean on for support.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so powerful and so important, because I think that is part of the problem, is this is your personal problem, and the government, your partner, or your employer, you don't get anything from them. And I think that's why allyship is really important. Even in the march towards changing corporate policy change, I want single people to basically be leading that charge, who don't actually benefit from the policy, say, this is what we want. And I think even as we talk about the broken business model of childcare, as Tim, I'm sure you could talk about all day long, but even as we're encouraging entrepreneurs to think about how this could look differently, what does a communal model look like? what does it look like when I realize I got to run out at 6 and I can't find a sitter on Care.com. And I know though other people in my neighborhood who also, have childcare that I could go drop my kid off, and that becomes normal, or the way that we take care of families in our neighborhood and in our community. And so I just think that we have to start looking at, in many ways, that like the link starts with childcare and looking at that differently. The other one thing I want to ask you, Claire, is does the model of advocacy have to change? I think a lot about this for Marshall Plan for Moms is like most mothers movements have been about our children, right? Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Mothers, Demand Action, climate change, et cetera. But we have not had a movement of moms fighting for issues for moms, because in many ways that has felt like it's selfish, right? Is that part of it too? I mean, could we have gotten this bill passed if 1 million moms marched, on Washington and demanded it in this moment post-Dobbs, where Republicans are pretending to be the party of women and children? Is this the moment when you could get a bipartisan bill passed on childcare or on paid leave? I mean, what is the opportunity there, do you think?
It's interesting because a lot of Republican governors that have banned abortion in their states are now saying that they're talking about what sounds like a very progressive family policy agenda of like paid leave and childcare, and we want to help people want to raise families. And we did a deep dive into the policies in all 50 states, and it doesn't line up. The states that have banned abortion have absolutely the worst support for families, for poor families, for single mothers. They also have the highest infant mortality and maternal mortality rates. Mississippi is the prime example here, which is the state that, of course, sent Dobbs to the Supreme Court. So that's one piece. In terms of mothers advocating, I would just say parents, because I think relegating it to mothers is a challenge for all these reasons that we've been discussing. I think that men doing more in the house, like in your own household, and then on a corporate level, and then on a policy level, makes a really big difference. I've written a fair amount about how Joe Biden talked about care a lot in his campaign. He talked about being a single father unexpectedly early on. He talked about caring for his adult son when he was dying of cancer. And then he made caregiving an agenda. And I do wonder if having, an older man or, any man talk about it made a difference. Of course, it wasn't passed, but it became a bigger part of the Democratic agenda and the congressional agenda than it had in a very long time. So I think that men getting involved in all aspects of this is a key to making a big difference. And women, mothers have a lot on their plates already.
Hear, hear. No, thank you, Claire. This has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is fantastic. Thanks, Claire. Really appreciate
it. Yes. And I think that the next couple of years are going to be really interesting, because I do think that like so much of what you've written about, I think the activists have taken that, and I know I have, and said, okay, now what are we going to do about it? And so there's just a moment, I think, for real change. And I think part of it is because you've helped educate us and like link the dots. But I think I think a lot of what you have written about over the years, people knew, they felt it, but they didn't know. They didn't have the data, know? And I think having the data is really important to really making change.
I think thank you very much. I do think the data matters a lot to this beat, making it less anecdotal and less sort of wishy-washy. I also think that it's just that a lot of people felt like they were doing this alone. Like, this is really hard for my family. Everyone else clearly has it figured out. And it's not true.
It's just me. I'm the mess, right? 100%. I'm the one who can't make it. Yeah. True.
I was going to even say, like, I know a lot of parents who have read your articles, Claire, and it's been, I'm not me. Other people have. Like, it really is a sense of community when, just even touching back on what you were talking about in that the real change is going to come in terms of societal for communities that we're going to build, like the network of communities we're going to build of parents helping parents. This is an incredible place where, your materials, your data are bringing people together and going, oh, good. It's not just me. I'm not the mess over here. Right. And everyone else is awesome, which I think we get into as parents a lot of times.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's just no normalization of like, oh, shoot. everyone has to kind of deal with this.
Yeah.
Everyone's going through some
Yes.
craziness.
I mean, I think you guys are overstating my contribution to this discussion, but yes, I totally agree with everything else you're saying.
No, we're definitely not overstating it, because I do think, no, in all seriousness though, this could have been a topic that just wasn't written about and that wasn't talked about. And, you know, you were central to basically elevating that and making people, parents, women, mothers feel seen and heard, but also like making, again, the business case, which I think is really critical to policy change. So, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
All righty, Claire. Well, thanks for being here. And Tim, thanks for another great conversation. Wish me luck on having a child that's sleeping through the night.
I mean, yes.
I want to hear all about it.
I just helped my sister sleep train her new baby, and we've decided that it's my plan B.
You want to come to my house? I'm not that far from you. I'm going to live in Chelsea.
Sleep training. I'm going to be like available on text. It's going to be like $500 a text.
Yeah, I was going to say, Claire, are you doing it at 1 a.m. too? Or are you like waking up and allowing them to call?
I feel like you're just like whispering statistics to the baby to like lull them to sleep, and then like that's how it works.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right.
Good luck.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.